Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can listen to us on air live, like in your kitchen on your little radio or in your car on your radio. Do we still have any of those things? When I started doing this show, which was 1987, we had all of those things. But now, maybe yes, maybe no, probably no. But nonetheless, you can listen anytime by going to iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, nccradio.org, and the WHPC app. In addition, yesterday I Googled, I know what that means now, our show on Amazon Radio, and it is there too. So basically, you can find it anywhere. And also, we'd like you to know that Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And we've been doing that for a long time and continue to. And today, our guest is Dr. Peter Rogers. He's a Stanford, Northwestern, and Harvard-educated medical doctor, renowned for his expertise in health, nutrition, and performance optimization. He has dedicated over 25 years to researching and teaching in many fields, including neuroscience, atherosclerosis, dementia prevention, back pain treatment, nutrition, weight loss, cognitive performance, and many other areas of health and wellness. Dr. Rogers has a commitment to empowering individuals to take control of their health. And we're going to be talking today about his book, and I see he has more than this book, but we'll be talking about Medical Reformation Vegan Renaissance Bible, the poor man's guide to health, nutrition, and toxicology. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Rogers.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks.
Now, you've been obviously interested in a vegetarian diet a long time, not just when you decided to bring this book on board. So let's go back in time. And why did you become a doctor in the first place?
Well, I was a pretty good athlete when I was young with a full scholarship to college wrestling. I got injured. My wrestling career kind of went downhill. And, I talked to my mother on the phone. She said, God doesn't want you to be a wrestler. He wants you to be a great doctor or a great scientist. And I'm like, I'll go with that. And I was super motivated. I studied a ton. But what really got me interested in nutrition and whatnot was in my early 30s, I became fat. I was, a workaholic, working too much. And I figured you just exercise more, eat less, but that did not work. That's sort of a mantra for chumps. So I then had to really start studying nutrition in great detail. And I kind of realized that basically most of the important information about health is not included in the medical school curriculum or the medical textbooks. Conventional medicine, missed the boat. So it was kind of amazing to me to realize that. And that's kind of what my book is about from that point on.
Well, I would say, since I've been also studying natural health since 1964, that you are absolutely correct. And it really seems that as we move forward in time, even, in fact, I participate a lot with the NIH, and they're talking more about what you're talking about is evidence-based medicine, and why that does not reflect at all in what physicians learn. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, well, the mantra of medical school is match the ill to the pill and send a bill. And that's very profitable to sell drugs because medical school is really training in becoming an internal medicine doctor. All the other fields like surgery, pathology, radiology, that's learned later in residency and whatnot. And what all doctors are trained in is basically that for each disease, it's a unique thing, and there's some pill that is the best option to treat it. They kind of blame everything on aging, genetics, and maybe viruses, okay? But the reality is that causes hardly any diseases. Most diseases due to problems with nutrition and also problems with toxicology. And, you can show that is true by looking at epidemiology. But those three subjects are not taught in the pre-med curriculum med school residency or the conventional textbooks. Doctors take their boards based on the conventional textbooks, and then they typically become workaholics. It's like an assembly line, and they want to make partner in their group. Then they delay having a family. So they actually never read. Most physicians are functional illiterates. And because of that, they really don't know what's going on with nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. And those are the main things worth learning to help people with most of the chronic diseases.
That is so true. I was at a conference last week, and a medical doctor was sharing with us that when you're in one of those groups, which unfortunately almost every practicing physician is in now, you're actually rewarded or punished depending on how many prescriptions you have written. And they get part of their salary withheld if they don't meet, let's say, a certain number of drugs that have been prescribed that month.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I was young, you go into healthcare professions wanting to help people, but the further you move along the system, it basically trains you that you need to make money for your group, and that nobody cares about the patients. That's kind of a bizarre thing too. I've never seen a single hospital or group that ever keeps track of patient outcomes. What they keep track of is productivity and efficiency. Are you generating enough prescriptions or billing codes? Are you carrying your weight, so to speak, earning your salary, whatever. And you don't get reimbursed for helping the patient, for empowering the patient, teaching them. So all the pressure is to follow the so-called standard of care. And when you do that, you can't be sued, you make money. And the fact of the matter is the patient is irrelevant. Whatever happens to the patient, it has nothing to do with your salary. It has nothing to do with really kind of anything.
Well, I would say, unfortunately, that's absolutely true. And I want to remind our listeners that you're here today listening to Herbally Yours on 90.3 WHPC. And our guest is Dr. Peter Rogers. And if you find what he says fascinating, which I'm sure you do and you will, check out his book, Medical Reformation Vegan Renaissance Bible. And then the subtitle is Poor Man's Guide to Health, Nutrition, and Toxicology. What do you mean by that? Poor Man's Guide to Health, Nutrition, and Toxicology.
Well, I'm kind of getting the fact as, take a look at our ancestors. If you look at ancestral populations, almost all of them are skinny. Only the rich people used to have enough money to eat all this meat so routinely. And nowadays, too, it's more complicated than that. There's all this processed food. There's all this fried food. And these things weren't that widely available in the past, and they're bad for people's health. So what I'm saying is it doesn't cost a lot of money to eat whole foods, primarily plant foods, and, to do the things that have made us healthy for many thousands of years. Get your exercise, get your sunshine, manage your stress, all of this stuff. It's available to anybody for free. You have to eat anyway, so just eat healthy food.
You say that and people go, oh, it sounds easy, but it is. When I've done nutritional counseling with people who claim to have very limited incomes, you know what? If you make cabbage and brown rice and beans, that's a very inexpensive meal and you can feed the whole family. So it's really not about having to be wealthy to eat healthy.
Oh, that's a good line there. You don't have to be wealthy to eat healthy. Yeah, and you look at the starches, like you just mentioned, your rice, beans, potatoes, sweet potatoes. They are cheap, they store for a long time, and they taste good. I mean, it's a good deal, and they make you healthy.
And it is pretty easy to cook, but some people go then they don't have time to prepare. So what I do is I actually prepare food maybe once or twice a week, and then I'll warm it up because I'm on the road so much. But there's nothing to grab and go on the road, so I make my own grab and go healthy food. And boy, that saves a lot of money as well.
Yeah, like for example, I make my rice with an Instapot. You just add water to it, push the button, and I'll make 3-4 days at a time. That's worked well for me. Usually just 3 days, but it works well for me. I've been real happy with it, and I typically will eat the rice. I usually eat white rice, organic California is what I usually eat, but I eat rice. Mixing it tastes great for me with beans, with potatoes. I often have sweet potatoes. I'll eat those separately.
Right. And so these things are not expensive, but sometimes people feel really threatened if they have to prepare anything because everything has moved towards such an ultra processed, as you brought up, Dr. Peter Rogers, earlier. a mindset where all food is, either in a package, frozen, or purchased at a to-go facility that's really not giving you food.
Oh, yeah, and it's actually easy to prepare. The only thing I do for cooking is I just boil food. I don't do anything else except boil food. And then I also eat some fruits. I often have a bunch of blueberries and, sometimes other things if they're available for me. Sometimes grandma cooks for me or my wife or my daughter will cook for me. But, when I'm by myself, I just boil stuff and that works well.
Well, I go one step less. I don't even boil most things, just steam. I use steam as my main process of cooking. And yes, in terms of preparing grains, that would be boiling. But that's the only thing I do, absolutely only thing I do. And it really is very inexpensive and easy. That's the thing. People get to think it's not. Now, when you're talking right in the name of your book, Medical Reformation Vegan Renaissance Bible, Poor Man's Guide to Health, Nutrition, and Toxicology, what are you talking about in terms of toxicology?
Well, if you look closely at the sterilized food, and just so you know, I was like just about the best biochemistry student in the entire United States when I was in med school, graduated first in my class. I tell you this because I spent some time going through the ingredients in these processed foods, and I actually think they're designed to make people fat, stupid, and sterile, infertile. It kind of turns out that estrogenic chemicals are very useful as preservatives. And they often have like a birth control effect. In addition, there's other chemicals in there that are toxic in that sense. They're often neurotoxic, the chemicals in these foods. A typical example would be, let's say you sell a processed food. You want it to have as long a shelf life as possible, and so it can't grow mold in it. Otherwise, if it grows mold, they'll send it back to the company. So they put a lot of fungal inhibitors there. Well, fungal inhibitors are mitochondrial inhibitors. Anything that inhibits mitochondria, it's typically going to be bad for the brain. It's going to certainly be bad for your energy levels as well. But then you look at the processed corn. It's typically, GMO corn. It's sprayed with atrazine, a very powerful herbicide. That's the one that turns the male frogs into females. It's also a mitochondrial complex 3 inhibitor. It's going to decrease your energy load. It's very toxic. The packaging often with BPA, bisphenol A, the plastic, an estrogenic toxin. It's a mitochondrial toxin and it's an estrogenic toxin, reproductive toxin. It turns out there's a guy, I think his name was Cirolini, did a lot of research on glyphosate, and he also did research on estrogenic chemicals. He came to the conclusion that most of these estrogenic chemicals are not just endocrine disrupting, estrogen disrupting chemicals. They're also neurologic toxins, about 80% of them, and about 20% of them are toxic to the thyroid. So these are just, weakening people, decreasing their energy levels, decreasing their cognitive function. And, you look at soy. Soy has, well, I'm not even going to get into soy. That's a whole other topic, and that's a complex subject. But all I'm saying is,
okay, well, wait a minute. I think it's a good thing to bring up, but would you differentiate between organic soy and non-organic soy, which is certainly highly sprayed with what you just mentioned, glyphosate?
Oh, yeah, the non-organic stuff is a major problem. I think glyphosate is much more dangerous than is widely recognized. If you look at its name, glyphosate, a good way to pronounce it, I like to call it glycine phosphate or glyphosate. Glyphosate is often like the most precise, correct way to pronounce it. But if you call it glycine phosphate, that's useful because it tells you what it is. It's a glycine, the smallest amino acid that has only a hydrogen for side group, combined with a phosphate. Now, glycine, being the smallest amino acid, is often incorporated into proteins in the active site of an enzyme. Its small size creates space in the enzyme active site. It's also very important for collagen, which is the connective tissue scaffolding protein of our body. About 1/3 of all the proteins in our body are collagen, and it has a triple helix configuration. So there's a glycine at every third amino acid residue. Well, when you have glycine phosphate substitute in there, it disrupts your collagen. In a sense, it's weakening the scaffolding of your entire body. There was an interesting lady. She's a MIT PhD. Her name is Stephanie Seneff. She wrote an entire book about glycine phosphate toxicity called Toxic Legacy. It's rather interesting. And so what I'm saying is that's what's sprayed on non-organic soy, and it is basically cheap protein for processed food. Typically comes from non-organic soy. Cheap sugar like high fructose corn syrup.
So it's in like everything if people read their ingredients. Yeah.
Yeah. It's ubiquitous in processed food. That's why you can't win with processed food.
even in things that are touted as healthy, like soy burgers. So even if you made the decision to get away from a lot of meat, which you do discuss, and then you switch over to soy burgers, you're not really going down a healthy path.
Yeah, I would never eat that stuff.
Me either, but that's why we're here to educate people. So we're going to take just a little shout out to our station here. And thank you so much for being our guest today, Dr. Rogers. And thank you so much for listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. You can listen live online at nccradio.org or on any of your podcast venues. For more information on today's guest or topic, you can email us at whpc@ncc.edu. And we'll continue right now with more right here on Herbally Yours and with our guest, Dr. Peter Rogers. We're talking about his book, extremely interesting, Medical Reformation Vegan Renaissance Bible, Poor Man's Guide to Health, Nutrition, and Toxicology. But is there a medical reformation or not? I think you're sharing with us that that's not really happening yet.
Yeah, I wrote the book to try to help people. My attitude is the people that are smart enough and motivated enough, they ought to have correct information somewhere. But I can tell you, doctors don't know what they're doing, and the medical textbooks are completely wrong. I literally went through all these medical textbooks, and I can tell you they're all wrong. The internal medicine field and its subspecialties, almost all their textbooks are fundamentally wrong. And the reason is because they attribute disease causation to aging, genetics, and occasionally viruses. But when you actually start looking at epidemiology, you'll see there's entire populations where the incidence, for example, let's say you talk about hypertension in the United States. They'll say 95% is idiopathic or essential. And idiopathic means the doctor's an idiot and the patient's pathetic. They're saying they don't know the cause. Therefore, since no one knows the cause, you might as well take their pill, try to slow it down. But when you look at plant-based dietary communities like the Yanomamo in the Amazon jungle of South America who eats a plant-based diet, they don't have any hypertension. If you look at black people in America, they have hypertension off the charts. You walk through any kidney dialysis unit, you'll see all these relatively young, early middle-aged black men in kidney failure on dialysis. But then you take a look at a study, Lancet Journal, 1929, author's name is Donison, 1,800 consecutive admissions to the hospital in Kenya where they ate a plant-based diet. They measured their blood pressure in every single one of them. Out of 1,800, there were 0 hypertensive patients, okay? So that's why epidemiology is so powerful. It shows you conclusively that populations eating these traditional, primarily plant-based diets, they don't get hypertension. They don't get type 2 diabetes. And then because of that, they get hardly any atherosclerosis. And so then they don't get coronary artery disease, and they're unlikely to ever have a stroke. And they also have lower rates of cancer. So basically, it's a win all around, but almost no one knows about it.
Well, I don't know. I think the word is spreading, but you're certainly, part of that solution. Now, I know that many of your lectures are available on YouTube, and also you have been on platforms such as Chef AJ's YouTube channel. How would people find you there?
Well, that's a good thing. Yeah, Chef AJ's channel, I got a lot of my lectures, and I try to make them real good for Chef AJ's. It's kind of like being on TV in the vegan world. And also at Veg Source. The Veg Source is another one of the most famous vegan nutrition channels at YouTube. So that would be a good place to see the lectures. I also have my own YouTube channel, Peter Rogers, MD. And basically, I sort of feel like this is my hobby. I don't monetize my channel. I just do it because I feel good about it. I always wanted to be a great doctor. I didn't go into medicine to just make money. It really wasn't my priority at all. I sort of felt like I had gone from being a great athlete to just being, I was good. I was student athlete here at Stanford, but I was no longer like my friends. My friends are all Americans, national champions and stuff. So I wanted to become great at something. I really liked this nutrition. It saved my health. So I enjoyed doing it. So it's real easy and fun for me to do it. But what I'm basically saying here, though, is I put my best effort into stuff where I'm getting interviewed like it on these video channels rather than on my own YouTube channel. I mean, I try to make my videos good, but a lot of times I just get an idea and I got to make it real fast because I work full time. I'm tired.
So wait a minute. You're still working as a physician?
Yeah, I'm a clinical physician. I work full time, man, 60 hours a week.
So I didn't know that. So let me delve into that a little bit. I do also work full-time, and I'm a PhD RN, but I work only in alternative, or shall we say, natural-focused environments, which I have found since 1964 have expanded tremendously, even within more of a mainstream setting. And that's the only thing I will do. So how do you, how are you okay with that? If you're in a conventional setting, don't you have to also just prescribe medicine rather than talk to people about like a plant-based diet?
Well, internal medicine and internal medicine subspecialties are all sort of pharmaceutical based, but I came from a different background. I initially I was an imaging guided surgeon, also called interventional radiologist. And then I changed to being primarily a neuroradiologist. So I had to write admitting orders and prescribe some meds as an interventionalist. But now as a neuroradiologist, I give local anesthetic when I do biopsies and myelograms and things like that. But I don't, I'm not like an internist doctor who prescribes pills to patients. And I like the brain. I was fascinated with the brain. And I've done some interesting research on there, too. I figured out the best theory of dementia causation and prevention. And that's not widely known, and that's interesting, too.
So wait. I'm not going to let you leave our show today without, is that in your book? And how would you share that just in a brief way? Yeah,
well, first of all, I'm going to just let you know that a lot of times the common idea of doing things is bogus, untrue. And I think Alzheimer's, for example, is a total joke. If you talk to any doctor or open up any internal medicine neurology book, they'll tell you Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. In my opinion, it's a joke, it's fake, it's stupid. And here's the reason why. If you go up to a patient and ask them a question, there is no diagnostic question to confirm they have Alzheimer's. If you do a physical exam on them, there is no physical exam finding. There is no blood test to diagnose it. Then they'll say, well, you can diagnose it by imaging. You get characteristic medial temporal lobe and parietal lobe convexity atrophy. But that's not true. I'm a neuroradiologist. I looked at tens of thousands of brains with cognitive impairment and dementia. I almost never see that pattern. And then you see, well, they can diagnose it at autopsy, right? They've got, the senile plaques, extracellular, neurofibrillary tangles, intracellular. No, they found that a lot of normal patients will have those findings, and a lot of demented patients who they think have Alzheimer's do not have those findings. That's part of what that, Notre Dame nuns, Mankato, Minnesota cognitive reserve theory was about, an ex post facto way to try to maintain the Alzheimer type theory. Okay. And what I'm trying to say is it doesn't work. There's a much better theory that's simple to understand, and that's the Jack Delatorre theory. He's a PhD out of Texas. He tied off the internal carotid artery in the neck of a mouse. 2 months later, middle-aged and older mice would become demented. And he then called this the vascular hypothesis of dementia. And at first thought, you'd say, so what? Not many people have carotid artery occlusions, and that is true. But he described it as chronic cerebral hypoperfusion, and he did an autopsy on these mice. He at first expected to see a big stroke on the same side where he tied off the carotid, but they didn't have a stroke. They just had an atrophic brain. And then he said to himself, well, gee, how about this? If a person has congestive heart failure, they'll have chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. If they have atrial fibrillation, where they don't fill the atrium very well before it then fills the ventricle, they're conducting less blood with each heartbeat, they'll have chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. If a patient has hypertension and they overtreat it, they get chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. And even if you just let the hypertension go completely and it's too high, the high pressures will damage the arteries of the brain. They'll get intracranial atherosclerosis, which leads to the same long-term result of decreasing oxygen delivery to those brain neurons. A lot of people have atrial fibrillation. Oh, I've said AFib already. Aortic regurgitation, aortic stenosis. Okay, a lot of people are kept hypotensive for days after they have open heart surgery, a CABG, coronary artery bypass graft. And that can lead to pump head, so to speak, and cognitive impairment.
Well,
okay,
so you know what? What does that all mean? Like, that was an excellent information, but not everyone will understand all that you shared. But what's the bottom line there?
The bottom line for the Delatorre theory is take good care of your health, because the pills will have a tendency to mess you up. If you eat a bad diet, you're like lots and lots of high-fat food, especially sat fat, and then you also have lots of sodium. It's a vasoconstrictor. It's going to make you hypertensive. There's even something called Asian atherosclerosis, which is intracranial atherosclerosis, because like the Japanese in 1960s were eating 12 grams a day of sodium and smoking a lot of cigarettes, and that was causing severe hypertension intracranial atherosclerosis. So what I'm saying is if you eat a healthy diet, then you don't need the hypertensive pills. But the pills themselves are dangerous because there will be a tendency sometimes to overtreat the hypertension, and then you end up like the mouse, chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. That means lack of blood supply to the brain, and the cells are gradually dying. Okay, so that's the dilatory theory. And I give that to you first because my theory then, the Peter Rogers MD theory of neurodegeneration, is called the neurovascular uncoupling theory. And what it basically means is a neuron has a baseline metabolic rate, and it has to match the amount of oxygen and glucose delivery, the blood flow, neurovascular coupling, so they're equal. And for example, if you're relaxed, your neurons are not that active. But if you're walking through a forest and all of a sudden you see a bunch of coyotes running towards you, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to run, I got to jump, I got to climb a tree. You get a rapid increase in activation, and that neuron will need much more glucose and oxygen to function correctly. And then foods come into play. Like if you're stressed out, that increases the metabolic rate of a neuron. Sleep deprivation and caffeine have the same effect. And a lot of people multiply those things. They're stressed out, they're sleep deprived, and they drink a lot of caffeine. So that ramps up the neuron's metabolic rate. And they need to ramp up the oxygen and glucose delivery, the blood supply to that neuron in order for it to function correctly. And then I alluded to it earlier in the processed food. There's lots of mitochondrial inhibitors. Mitochondria make the energy of the cell, the ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And so you have to be able to get that oxygen and glucose and make that ATP energy for that neuron to function correctly. And what I'm saying is people are being nickeled and dimed to death by 1,000 cuts. They're stressed out, sleep deprived, drinking caffeine, and they're ingesting all these mitochondrial inhibitors, and their brain cells can't keep up with their metabolic rate, and these neurons are dying, and they're becoming stupid, cognitively impaired, and demented.
Well, that was quite a bit of information, and I loved every minute of it, and I want to let our listeners know that they can find out more by looking at your book with this great table of contents. And although you have this vast amount of knowledge, I feel in your book you present it in a really easy to understand way. Like, different kinds of wonderful recipes you can use and why these things are important. So thank you so much for being our guest today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in once again to another edition of Herbally Yours right here on WHPC. Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York, 90.3. For further information, send us an email at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.